giving that to quality ones, providing examples of what you're looking for, that expectation, and having the kids apply that. Or even to say, okay, you have to show me more than one way or more than two ways to do this particular problem. So now we've appeased the parent that wants that procedural piece, but then now we're also building that understanding of why is this procedure actually working, and I'm not just following these steps. What are some other factors of misconceptions? And you can think outside of multiplication division, but just general mathematics.
If something works once, it's going to work every time.
Ooh, if it works once, it's going to work every time. Yeah.
There's only one way of solving a problem.
Only one way of solving a problem. If that was the case, we would be in a world of trouble about a whole lot of issues. That is for sure. Any other factors you ladies can think of?
In subtraction, I've noticed this with my kids, like, not necessarily that you always subtract a smaller number. Well, I guess that's the misconception, because even if it's a multi-digit number, they always, even if the 7's here and the 2's there, they always subtract the smaller number.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know, like, the phrasing of that is confusing.
Because
For
what we
kids.
normally say.
You
Like to so you subtract the smaller number from the larger number.
Or
the smaller digit, or whatever.
Or who's guilty of saying, and you can just like wink your eye, you don't have to raise your hand, guilty of saying you can't take 7 from 3, or you can't subtract 7 from 3, so I've been guilty of, I've been guilty of saying that as well. But then we realize, well, as kids get older and they get into 6th grade and they begin working with integers,
And they can't
we
go
know
back
as
to
adults, if you have $3 in your account and you spend 7, they're taking that money.
I usually tell them you can do it, but we're not ready for that yet.
Yes, and that's a wonderful way of saying that, because
I want you to get
to
this
know-
concept first,
yes.
and that'll come
Because I
later.
do say that, but I do say exactly like you said. I said, and that's not something we're ready to do. but we
Excellent.
will
I say, if I have
Right.
3 marbles, can I take away 7
I say
out of
that
my hand?
exact same
And they're
thing.
like, no. I'm like, what do I do?
But because you can have a negative
can do
amount
it,
of marbles,
But
yeah.
then
But
hopefully you'll have that
the
kid that
thing.
say,
They don't have to see that
Right.
yet. Like, that's not a visual.
And that's
Which I
okay
miss.
too, because you don't need for them to see that, and that's why those two comments. You
Should be
can,
the
but we're
go-to.
not ready for that yet.
Yeah.
So let's figure out a way that we're ready.
You
to do
have that one kid in the class that was like, oh, it's a negative number. And it's like,
And you're like, you're
great though.
exactly
I like
right.
that
Yes.
though, which is what I was
I
telling her.
have
I missed
one
that.
kid that
year,
said that.
last year, not this year.
And it's like, that's great. Yeah, that's what I just said to her. I
Or
was like,
somebody said, oh, well, you can cut it in half.
Right,
and
which
you-
is great,
Which is
because then you know
awesome.
that somebody has that
because they know
knowledge
that they can
and
build
you
Because
those
that's
numbers
now
down.
leads into fractions.
Yes,
we,
it
we're
does.
gonna get there. I was telling
Yes.
her, we will get there. Let's-
Exactly.
Maybe
And it
not
doesn't
this
mean
year,
that you
but-
have to. Yeah. Right.
But you never
right.
know. Sometimes they click and you could get there, but you know, at this
Yeah.
moment, let's.
Let's focus on how.
But I don't
we
like
can
to tell them
build
that it's
that
not
down.
ever possible.
Exactly. So
Not
having
today.
those absolutes
It's not possible.
as
It's not possible
teachers,
today.
yeah, having those absolutes as teachers, kind of, you know, that's something that we do mistakenly. We don't do that on purpose to create misconceptions. What are some other things that maybe you've been guilty of in the past to create misconceptions in your kids? But now when you think about it,
That right there, we just talked about.
that right there.
I
I've done
think
that
using
this
words,
year.
using all-inclusive words like always or never.
Yeah,
You know,
all-inclusive words, or even keywords to say, this always means,
right.
and that always means, and that's not.
I've started to say most of the time, because like most of the time if they see what is the difference,
Mm-hmm.
we are looking for the gap between that smaller number and the bigger number. And we've
Okay.
used the open number line to try to teach them what they're looking for.
Uh-huh.
But is there a scenario where the word difference would mean to add and not subtract?
Well, I think there's a way that you can use addition instead of subtraction
Yeah.
as a strategy instead of saying, yeah.
Well, and one of our students did, Tyler, yesterday said we can count on to get to the big number.
We
because I
could.
drew the number
Because
line.
remember that
An
activity,
activity.
how far is
So I
my
said to
number?
him, I said, yeah, I said, we don't have those 10 frames from Miss Grundy right now, but yes, you're remembering that way to do it. I said, if we don't have, but see, okay, here's my question. I wrote it down on a sticky note. You may or may not do CRCT like this year or next year, right? We don't know, and there's a new format of the test, right? And they've got,
It's still going to be CRCT this
okay,
year.
they have a time limit.
As far as, like, I don't know the time limits, but we are going to look at how the format has changed.
Okay, like I don't want him to draw your 10 frame activity. I want to teach him maybe an open number line, how to skip
Yes.
and write his benchmark numbers.
Exactly.
And that might be the best way to teach them.
Exactly.
Yeah. He remembered her activity and he said we can count on.
Absolutely.
But he likes to yell out the wrong answer.
He does, but I wanted them to understand why we would subtract, but anyway.
Yeah,
I just
and
can't think of an example where you would say what is the difference between and where you would have it. I'm still trying to get them to eventually end up with that subtraction problem. I want
Right.
them to do that,
I don't know where you would say what's the difference.
even if they can tell me other ways, so that's my fault for wanting to force them.
For you to add first and then you find it.
but then you
Kind of
still
like
have
on
to-
that one there that they gave us, was that she brought 3 lunch tickets on Monday, 5 on
Tuesday, I think, or Friday, yeah. And that's one of the biggest things too, is putting it in context. That context determines what strategy they can use to approach it. So, any other ways that we develop misconceptions? I know I slapped myself this weekend because my daughter we were talking about numbers. Imagine that. So we're at home talking out loud numbers, and she says this is 11 because she's thinking 1 and 1 is 11. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And I was like, no, that's 2. It's not 11. Just because you hold up 2 fingers and they're 1 side by side, that doesn't make it 11 because the quantity is not 11.
It looks
So,
like an 11,
right,
but it
right.
doesn't represent 11.
So even in something as simple as that, developing a misconception. So now this will be associated with 11, and it's really 2.
Yeah.
Well, how can we counter misconceptions when they arise? We've already addressed the one where the parents are creating these misconceptions. What can we do as teachers to kind of help combat misconceptions that arise in our classrooms?
Allow the
What
child
about
to
that 1 and 1
explain
still?
it.
Allow
the child to
explain.
explain.
Because you're telling yourself the total amount, saying you're 1 finger, another finger, but 1 and 1 written standard is the 11. So
Standard form or what?
Well, really, it's not 1 and 1. It's 110 and 1 1.
Did she say it's 1 and 1?
She said it's 1 and 1.
Oh, she said it's 1
Yeah,
and
she
1.
didn't say
Okay, 1 and 1.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay, all
yeah.
right.
Because that 1 doesn't represent a 1 to 0.
Right.
I
Okay.
think with,
Yeah.
for me, how to not have very many, not have a large amount of misconceptions is that being moved into 3rd grade, I'm gonna have to do a lot of preparation. I'm gonna have to become more familiar with, because what's in my head right now is basic arrays and groups from 2nd grade to the more explicit, training, teaching of it. So, I'm gonna have to spend, more time to meet the professional knowledge so that, I'm not shooting off at the mouth, I'm
You're having to correct yourself.
I'm gonna have to be prepared.
And that's wonderful that you would share that, to say, I myself need to become a student and a learner of this information so that I can better prepare myself.
And I think that is what is, is more difficult coming from another grade level, and you even coming from first having to go up, more, it's, and I know that y'all are having to make changes. You coming down, you coming up, y'all been there, and you are having to make changes because things are changing, but you have a greater understanding of it already, and we've got to first grasp the standard of what we're supposed to be teaching, and then we've got to figure out the best way to teach it to the children that are in our class, because I wouldn't teach it the same way to your class as I'm going to be teaching it in my class. So yeah, it's a big learning curve for me this year, and I'm not sitting at home, playing on Facebook. I'm, looking for strategies and looking at those things that, what we could put in front of the children that will work. And
Yeah, and I'm going to show you something in a minute that will help you with that. I know Ms. Upson mentioned earlier, you were saying, how did you say?
Allow the child to explore that misconception, and they can figure out with their buddies or you the correct way it should be. You can then allow them to see that, hey, this doesn't work. I didn't come to the answer. And then the other kids will realize that, and then they can help them out, and you too, as a strategy for them to figure out.
Excellent. So them discovering this does not work, instead of me saying that's not going to work. Them discovering that when I take 7 away from 3, I'm not having enough, so what is it that I have to do? Or talking with a buddy to figure out other ways to approach a problem. That's excellent.
And while we're here, this is a question for all of you, having, trying to put a positive learning environment